The first thing Daniel Osei did when he stepped off that plane was close his eyes. Not because he was tired, not because the lights were too bright. He closed his eyes because he needed 1 second, just one, to hold on to the version of home he had been carrying in his mind for 7 years before reality had a chance to replace it. In that version, his mother Ada was standing at the gate of the compound in her favorite yellow dress, hands clasped together, eyes already wet before he even reached her. In that version, everything was exactly as he had left it. Everyone he trusted had done exactly what they promised. He opened his eyes. The airport was loud and hot and smelled like jet fuel and bodies. He grabbed his 2 bags from the carousel. Both of them stuffed, one with clothes, one with gifts he had spent 3 weekends carefully selecting. And he walked through the arrival doors into the thick evening air, and for the first time in 7 years, Daniel Osei was home. He did not know yet that home had become something unrecognizable. He did not know yet that the woman he had crossed an ocean for was not waiting at the gate, that she was not in the living room, that she was not even in the house he had sent money to maintain every single month without fail for 7 years, $800, sometimes $1,000, never once late, never once less than promised. He did not know that while he was in Houston working double shifts and eating plain rice so he could send more money home, something was happening to his mother in that compound. Something quiet, something deliberately hidden, something that, once he saw it with his own eyes, would hollow him out in a way that no amount of time would ever fully repair. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, Daniel Osei was just a tired man with 2 heavy bags and a heart full of hope, hailing a cab outside the airport, whispering his mother's name like a prayer. And right here, before the story goes one word further, let me pray for you. Go ahead and bow your head if you can. Because I mean this. Lord God, I lift up every single person watching this video right now. Father, you see them, you see where they are, what they are carrying, what they have been trusting you with in secret. God, I pray for every son and every daughter who has been far from home, working hard, sacrificing, sending money back month after month, trusting the wrong hands with the most precious person in their life. Lord, open their eyes before it is too late. Father, I pray for every mother who is sitting somewhere quiet right now, suffering in silence, saying I'm fine when she is not fine at all. God, let help come for her. Let the right person walk through that door. Let the hidden things be exposed. And Father, I pray for everyone watching who has been betrayed by someone they trusted completely. Heal that wound. Restore what was taken. And let justice come in a way that only you can bring it. In Jesus' name, if you receive that prayer, type Amen in the comments right now. Type it, because somebody watching this needed to hear every single word of that prayer tonight. Now, let us get into Daniel's story, because what is about to happen over the next few minutes is going to shake something in you. Daniel had been 27 years old when he left. He remembered the morning clearly. His mother Ada had woken before the sun to cook him a proper meal, jollof rice with fried plantain and chicken, the kind of meal she reserved for birthdays and celebrations, because she said his leaving was both a celebration and a loss and she was not sure which one was winning. She had packed everything into a flask and handed it to him at the gate and held his face in both her hands and looked at him for a long time without speaking. Then she had said very quietly, "Come back to me, Daniel. No matter what you find out there, come back to me." He had promised her he would. And every single Sunday for 7 years, he kept at least that part of the promise. 8 o'clock in the morning Houston time, he dialed her number and listened to her voice and asked the same questions without fail. "Are you eating well, Mama? Is the house okay? Is Kevin looking after things?" And every Sunday, Ada Osei gave him the same answers, warm, gentle, careful. "I'm fine, my son. We are managing. Focus on your work. God is watching over us here." He believed her. He believed Kevin. He believed the occasional photographs Kevin sent. Ada sitting in the living room, Ada at church in her good dress, Ada smiling at the camera with her hands folded neatly in her lap. He had studied those photographs more than he would ever admit, zooming in sometimes, looking for something he could not name, then putting his phone down and telling himself he was overthinking. He was not overthinking, but he did not know that yet. Daniel's younger brother Kevin Osei was 30 years old and charming in the way that certain people are charming, effortlessly, dangerously, The kind of charm that makes you feel completely at ease right up until the moment you realize everything you felt was a performance. Kevin had married Sandra 2 years after Daniel left for Houston. Sandra was sharp, image-obsessed, and had very clear opinions about how things should look from the outside. The house, the furniture, the car in the driveway, what the neighbors said when they talked about them over the fence. She had walked into that compound like a woman who had been waiting for exactly this her whole life, and slowly, so slowly that no one noticed until the damage was deep and done, she had made every corner of it hers. Nobody had stopped to ask Ada what she wanted. Nobody, it seemed, had thought about Ada very much at all. The cab pulled up to the compound just after 8 in the evening. Daniel paid the driver, picked up both bags, and stood at the gate for a moment. The house looked different. New paint, pale yellow, nothing like the white he remembered. New tiles on the front steps, the expensive patterned kind. New iron burglar bars on the windows with decorative curls that caught the streetlight and glinted softly. A satellite dish on the roof. A heaviness in his stomach he could not explain and did not try to. He pushed the gate open, and Kevin came through the front door with his arms already spread wide, grinning like a man with nothing to hide. "Brother," Kevin's voice boomed across the compound. "You are finally here. You are finally home." He crossed the yard in 4 long strides and pulled Daniel into a hug, the kind with hardback slaps, loud and warm and brotherly. Daniel hugged him back. He smiled, but even as he smiled, even as he breathed in the familiar smell of this place, red earth and night air and something frying inside, his eyes were already moving past Kevin's shoulder, scanning the doorway, searching the shadows behind him. His mother was not there. He told himself it was late. He told himself she was resting. He pulled back from the hug and looked at his brother's face. That easy, open, comfortable face, and he smiled again. But the unease in his stomach did not leave. It just got quieter, and quieter is sometimes worse. Sandra appeared in the doorway a few seconds after Kevin, smoothing the front of her bright orange dress with both hands like she had just put it on for the occasion. She probably had. She stepped forward with her arms slightly open and her smile perfectly placed. The kind of smile that had been practiced so many times it no longer reached the eyes. "Daniel," she said warmly, taking both his hands in hers. "Welcome home. We have been counting down to this day." "Thank you, Sandra," he said. "You look well." "We are managing," she said, which was an interesting thing to say for a woman standing in a freshly painted compound, wearing a dress that looked like it cost more than Daniel's first week's salary in Houston. She squeezed his hands once, let go, and her eyes dropped briefly to his 2 large bags on the ground before coming back up to his face. That quick downward glance, that small involuntary calculation. He filed it away without meaning to. Kevin was already pulling him through the front door, one hand on his shoulder, talking about the journey, asking about the flight, filling every available inch of silence with cheerful noise the way Kevin had always done since they were boys. Daniel let himself be pulled. He stepped inside and stopped. The living room was unrecognizable. The old brown sofa set that his mother had owned since before Daniel started secondary school, the one with the wooden armrests she polished every Saturday morning without fail, was gone. In its place sat a large gray sectional sofa, modern and expensive, the kind you saw in showroom windows with a price tag dangling from the armrest. A massive flat-screen television was mounted on the wall. Not just any wall. The specific wall where, for as long as Daniel could remember, a large framed photograph had hung. His mother and father on their wedding day, his father in a borrowed suit, his mother laughing at something off camera, young and radiant and completely herself. That photograph was gone. The wall was smooth and bare except for the television and its blinking standby light. Daniel stood very still. "You've really changed the place," he said. His voice came out even. He was proud of that. Kevin spread his hands with visible pride. "We had to modernize small. The house was getting tired. You know how these things go, you send the money, we make sure it goes to good use." "Of course," Daniel said. He ran his hand slowly along the back of the new sofa. The fabric was soft and expensive under his fingers. He thought about his mother's old sofa. He thought about how many evenings she had sat in the corner of it with her Bible open on her knee, reading in the lamplight after everyone else had gone to bed. He thought about where that sofa was now, whether anyone had asked her before they removed it. Sit, sit, Kevin said, gesturing grandly. Sandra has been cooking since afternoon. You must be starving. I am, Daniel said. He sat down. But first, where is Mama? I want to see her. Kevin's wave was loose and casual, almost dismissive. She's resting. You know how she is in the evenings these days. She tires quickly. She will see you in the morning. She will be so happy. Kevin. Daniel kept his voice low and pleasant. I just traveled 19 hours to come home. The first person I want to see is Mama. Where is she? A beat. Something moved briefly across Kevin's face. There and gone, like a cloud shadow crossing open ground. Then the smile came back. Boys' quarters, he said. She moved there herself about a year ago. Said the main bedroom was too hot for her and she wanted somewhere quieter. You know Mama, she likes her peace and quiet. Daniel looked at his brother for a moment. The boys' quarters, he repeated. She chose it herself, bro. Nobody forced her anywhere. Kevin said it a little too quickly. Then he clapped his hands together and turned toward the kitchen. Sandra, is the food ready? Our man is hungry. Daniel said nothing more. He sat in the gray sectional sofa that his money had bought, in the living room that used to hold his mother's photograph. And he smiled and he waited and he ate the food Sandra brought out on new ceramic plates he had never seen before. He talked about Houston. He answered questions about his job, his apartment, whether he had found a good woman yet. Kevin laughed loudly at that one. Sandra laughed too, a half-second after Kevin, the way people laugh when they are watching someone else to know when it is appropriate. The food was good. The conversation was easy. The evening looked, from the outside, like a warm homecoming. But Daniel barely tasted any of it. His eyes kept drifting. To the wall where the photograph used to hang. To the corridor that led to the back of the house. To Sandra, who refilled his cup twice without being asked and smiled at him each time with that careful, constructed warmth. To Kevin, who talked and laughed and leaned back in his chair with the ease of a man completely at home. Which, Daniel was beginning to understand, was exactly what Kevin was. At home. Fully, comfortably, expensively at home. In a house that was not entirely his. After dinner Kevin showed him to his old room. It had been kept reasonably well. A fresh sheet on the bed. The window curtain recently washed. But even here, small things were different. The old wooden wardrobe had been replaced with a newer one. The framed scripture verse his mother had put on the wall above the bed. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me was gone. Plain mirror hung in its place. Daniel set his bags down. He sat on the edge of the bed. Kevin leaned in the doorway, still talking, running through plans for tomorrow. They would visit some relatives, maybe have a small gathering. People were excited Daniel was back. Daniel nodded and said yes in the right places. And when Kevin finally said goodnight and pulled the door shut, Daniel sat in the silence for a long time. He thought about his mother in the boys' quarters. He thought about that wave of Kevin's hand. That loose, casual, almost impatient gesture. Like the question of where Ada Osei was sleeping was a minor thing. An administrative detail. Nothing worth pausing over. He lay down on the bed, but he did not sleep. Not really. He drifted in and out of a thin, restless half-sleep, and in it he kept seeing his mother's face the way it was in those photographs Kevin used to send. Sitting in the living room, hands folded, smiling at the camera. He had studied that smile so many times. He had always told himself it was her normal smile, her Sunday smile, the one she wore when she was content. Lying in the dark now, in a room that had been quietly stripped of everything she had placed in it, Daniel was no longer sure. He was not sure at all. Morning came gray and slow. Daniel was up before 5. He washed his face, pulled on a shirt, and walked quietly through the still house. Kevin and Sandra's bedroom door was closed. The kitchen was cold and untouched. No smell of tea, no sound of movement. In the house he grew up in, his mother had been the first one up every single morning without exception. He used to wake as a boy to the sound of her moving around the kitchen, the low hiss of the gas cooker, the soft sound of her humming something hymn-like under her breath. The house used to start with her. She used to be its heartbeat. This house started with silence. Daniel walked through the kitchen and out the back door into the yard. The morning air was cool and thin and smelled of damp earth and something burning far away. He crossed the yard slowly, past the old mango tree that had somehow survived everything, its thick roots still pushing up through the concrete like it refused to be contained. He walked to the boys' quarters at the far end of the compound, a low, narrow outbuilding that had been used for storage for as long as Daniel could remember. The door was slightly ajar. A thin line of light came from inside. He pushed it open. The room was small. Smaller than he remembered, or maybe it just felt that way because of what was in it, which was almost nothing. A thin mattress on a low wooden frame pushed against the wall. A small plastic table with a cup on it and a Bible lying open beside the cup. One wooden chair. A metal bucket in the corner. A single bulb hanging from the ceiling without a shade, casting a pale flat light over everything. A small standing fan in the corner, its grill brown with age, turning slowly and making a faint rattling sound with every rotation. Against the far wall, folded neatly on top of a small box, were his mother's good clothes, the ones she wore to church, the ones she saved for important days. Folded. Waiting. Ada Osei was sitting on the edge of the mattress. She was holding a plastic plate of leftover rice, eating slowly and quietly and alone in the pale light of a single bare bulb, the way you eat when you have forgotten that meals are supposed to feel like something. She looked up when the door opened, and when she saw Daniel, when her eyes found his face and understood that it was really him and not a dream or a wish, something happened to her expression that Daniel had never seen on his mother's face in his entire life. It was not just joy. Joy he had expected. Joy he had prepared himself for. What crossed Ada Osei's face in that moment, before she could rearrange it, before the smile came up to cover it, was something rawer and far more devastating than joy. It was relief. The kind of relief that only lives in a person who has been enduring something they should never have had to endure alone. Daniel stepped inside. He closed the door behind him. He crossed the small room and crouched down in front of his mother and looked at her face properly. Her thinner face, her tired eyes, her hands wrapped around that plastic plate, and he felt something crack open in the center of his chest. "Mama," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Why are you eating in here?" Ada smiled quickly. Too quickly. The plate trembled once in her hands. "I like it here," she said. "It is cool in the mornings. You know, I have always liked the cool." Daniel looked around the room. He looked at the mattress. He looked at the single bare bulb. He looked at her good clothes folded in the corner like they were being stored rather than worn. He looked back at her hands, thinner than he remembered, the knuckles more pronounced, the skin looser. He looked at his mother and he saw, with a sudden terrible clarity, everything that 7 years of Sunday phone calls and wire transfers and trusting the wrong person had failed to show him. He reached out and took the plate gently from her hands and set it on the plastic table. Then he took both her hands in his and held them. "Mama," he said again, "how long have you been sleeping in this room?" Ada looked at their joined hands. She did not answer. And in that silence, that long, careful, exhausted silence, Daniel Osei got every answer he needed. Daniel did not push his mother to speak that morning. He sat with her in that small room on the edge of the thin mattress and he held her hands and he let the silence be what it was. Ada leaned her head slowly against his shoulder the way she used to when he was a small boy and she was tired after a long day, and for a few minutes they just sat there together in the pale morning light while the old fan rattled and turned and the compound outside began to wake up slowly around them. After a while Ada straightened up and smiled at him and said she was going to wash her face and he should go and rest. She said it the way she said everything, gently, quietly, like she was always more concerned about the comfort of the person in front of her than her own. He watched her pick up the plate from the table and he watched her move across the small room with careful steps and he noticed the slight stiffness in her right knee that had not been there 7 years ago and he noticed the way she moved around the space like someone who had learned exactly where everything was in the dark. She had been here long enough to know this room in the dark. He went back inside the main house. Kevin and Sandra were still sleeping. He stood in the kitchen for a long time looking at the fully stocked fridge, the neat rows of food, the juice, the leftovers from last night's dinner wrapped in plastic and labeled in Sandra's handwriting. He thought about the plastic plate, the leftover rice, The single bare bulb. He made himself a cup of tea he did not drink, and then he went back to his room and sat on the bed and stared at the wall and tried to arrange what he was feeling into something manageable. He could not. What he was feeling was not the kind of thing that arranged itself neatly. It was hot and shapeless, and it moved through his chest like something looking for a way out. He waited until he heard Kevin and Sandra moving around in their room. He waited until he heard Sandra's voice in the kitchen and the sound of the kettle. Then he came out, greeted them pleasantly, said he was going for a morning walk to stretch his legs after the long flight. Kevin said, "Good idea, come back for breakfast." Sandra smiled and said she would make eggs. Daniel thanked her and walked out of the gate. He did not go far. He turned left out of the compound and walked 3 houses down to the pale green gate he had known since childhood. He knocked twice. There was a long pause, and then the sound of slow footsteps, and then the gate opened and Mrs. Grace Mensa stood there looking at him with eyes that went from surprise to something else entirely in the space of a single second. Mrs. Grace was 68 years old and had lived in that house for 32 years. She had known Daniel since he was running barefoot in the street. She had attended his father's funeral. She had watched Ada raise 3 children in that compound with patience and quiet strength, and not a single word of complaint about how hard any of it was. Mrs. Grace was the kind of neighbor that barely existed anymore. The kind who noticed everything, said nothing publicly, and waited. She had been waiting for Daniel. He could see it the moment she opened that gate. The way her eyes moved quickly to his face and searched it. The way she stepped back immediately to let him in without him having to say a word about why he was there. The way she pulled the gate shut behind him and looked back toward the compound like she was checking. "Come inside," she said. Her sitting room was small and familiar. The same floral chairs, the same framed Bible verses on the walls, the same smell of camphor and old wood and something floral he had never been able to identify. She sat across from him and folded her hands in her lap and looked at him steadily. "You saw her this morning," she said. It was not a question. "I saw her," Daniel said. Mrs. Grace nodded slowly. Her jaw tightened once, then released. "I have been praying," she said quietly, "that God would bring you home before things got worse." Daniel leaned forward. His elbows were on his knees and his hands were clasped together, and he kept his voice very controlled because he could feel what was underneath it, and he did not want to frighten this woman with how much of it there was. "Mrs. Grace," he said, "please tell me everything. From the beginning." And she did. She told it slowly and carefully, the way you tell a hard truth when you have been holding it for too long. Not with anger, not with drama, but with the quiet devastation of a witness who watched something wrong happen over a long period of time and could do nothing to stop it. She told him that Sandra had started making changes about 2 years after they moved in. Small things at first, rearranging the furniture, repainting rooms, making decisions about the house without consulting Ada. Ada had said nothing. Ada never said anything. That was her way. Then about 14 months ago, Sandra had told Ada that the main bedroom needed to be converted. She called it a guest room, a proper guest room, because they had family coming and the house needed to make a good impression. Ada had moved her things to the boys' quarters quietly and without argument. Mrs. Grace had watched her do it from over the fence. She had gone to Ada afterward and asked her directly if she was all right with the arrangement, and Ada had smiled that careful smile and said it was only temporary. That Daniel was coming soon. That things would sort themselves out. 14 months ago. Daniel said nothing. He sat very still and let her continue. The money, Mrs. Grace told him, was the other thing. She did not know exact figures. She was clear about that. She was not a woman who put her nose into other people's financial affairs without cause, but she knew what she had seen and heard. She knew that the wire transfers came into Kevin's account. She knew that Ada had mentioned once, quietly, with no accusation in her voice, that her medication money had been late 3 months in a row. She knew that new furniture had appeared in the main house at regular intervals. She knew that Sandra had bought a car 8 months ago. She knew these things because she lived 3 houses away and had eyes and had spent 32 years paying attention. She looked at Daniel when she finished speaking. His face was very still and very controlled, and there was something happening behind his eyes that she recognized. Not rage exactly, because rage is loud and this was quiet. This was the kind of thing that lives deeper than rage. The kind of thing that moves slowly and does not burn out quickly. She never complained, Mrs. Grace said softly. Your mother. Not once. Not to me, not to anyone as far as I know. She just kept saying you were coming. Every time I asked how she was, she said Daniel is coming. As if that was enough to hold on to. Daniel pressed his clasped hands against his mouth for a moment. His eyes were dry, but the effort of keeping them that way was visible in the set of his jaw, the tension across his shoulders, the way he was breathing slowly, deliberately, like a man managing something enormous in a very small container. She was holding on, he said finally. His voice was quiet and rough at the edges. She was holding on, Mrs. Grace confirmed. He thanked her. He stood up. She walked him to the gate and put her hand briefly on his arm before he stepped out and looked at him with the direct, unflinching eyes of a woman who had seen a great deal of life and was not going to pretend otherwise. Be wise about how you handle this, Daniel, she said. Do not just be angry. Be wise. He nodded. He stepped out onto the street. He stood there for a moment outside Mrs. Grace's gate and looked up at the sky, pale blue and wide and completely indifferent, and he breathed. Once, twice, 3 times. And then he walked back toward the compound slowly, his hands loose at his sides, his face composed, and absolutely nothing in his expression giving away the fact that everything had just changed. He pushed open the gate. Kevin was sitting on the front steps drinking tea and scrolling through his phone. He looked up and smiled when he saw Daniel. Good walk? He said. Very good, Daniel said. He smiled back at his brother. He went inside. Sandra was in the kitchen humming softly to herself, cracking eggs into a pan, the smell of butter and toast filling the air. She looked over her shoulder when he came in. Perfect timing, she said brightly. Sit down. Breakfast in 5 minutes. Thank you, Sandra, Daniel said pleasantly. He sat down at the kitchen table. He sat down at the kitchen table in the house his money had renovated, eating breakfast cooked by the woman who had moved his mother to a back room, served on plates he had never chosen, and he smiled and he ate and he asked Sandra how she liked her eggs and he let her talk about her plans for the week and he gave no indication, not the smallest flicker, of what was now sitting fully formed and immovable in his chest. Because Daniel Osei had not come all this way and waited 7 years and sent every dollar he could spare to come home and explode. He had come home to fix this, and he was going to fix it properly. That afternoon Daniel told Kevin he wanted to take their mother out. Just the 2 of them. A small drive, some fresh air, nothing elaborate. Kevin shrugged and said of course, good idea, she would enjoy that. Sandra smiled from the hallway and said to bring her back before evening. Daniel noted the phrasing. Bring her back. Like Ada was something that needed to be returned to its place before dark. He went to the boys' quarters and knocked gently on the open door. Ada was sitting in the wooden chair with her Bible open on her knee, her reading glasses low on her nose, her lips moving slightly the way they did when she was not just reading but absorbing, turning the words over in her mouth like something she needed to taste properly to understand. She looked up when Daniel appeared in the doorway and her whole face softened. You came back, she said. It was such a simple thing to say. Such a small, quiet thing. But it landed in Daniel's chest with tremendous weight because he understood, standing there in that doorway looking at his mother in that small bare room, that she was not just talking about this morning. She was talking about all of it. The 7 years. The waiting. The holding on. I told you I would, Mama, he said. She closed her Bible and took off her glasses and folded them carefully. She stood up slowly, one hand pressing briefly on her knee. Daniel moved forward instinctively to help her and she waved him off with a look. Still proud, still herself, still the woman who had carried everything alone for decades and had very strong opinions about accepting help gracefully. He stepped back and smiled and she straightened up and smoothed her dress and looked at him. Where are we going? She asked. Anywhere you want, he said. Ada thought about it for a moment with the seriousness of someone who had not been asked that question in a very long time. Then she said quietly, there is a place by the water I like to sit sometimes. A bench under a tree. I have not been there in a while. Then that is where we are going, Daniel said. He drove her there in the rental car he had picked up at the airport. It was not far, 15 minutes through slow afternoon traffic, past the market and the church with the blue roof and the row of school children in yellow uniforms walking in a crooked line along the roadside. Ada sat in the passenger seat with her handbag on her lap and her window rolled halfway down, and she looked out at everything they passed with an expression that Daniel could not fully read. Something between peace and sadness, the way people look at familiar things they have been separated from for too long. The bench was exactly where she said it would be, wooden and weathered, sitting under a broad tree at the edge of a small park that looked out over a stretch of still water. The afternoon light was low and golden, and it fell across the water in long broken lines. They sat down together, and for a while neither of them spoke, and the silence between them was the comfortable kind. The earned kind, the kind that only exists between people who have known each other at the deepest level. Then Ada said, without looking at him, "You went to see Grace this morning." Daniel did not insult her by denying it. "Yes," he said. Ada nodded once. She looked at the water. "She is a good woman," she said. "She has been very kind to me, Mama." Daniel turned to look at her profile. The strong jaw, the graying temples, the lines around her eyes that were deeper than he remembered. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ada was quiet for a long moment. A bird called once from somewhere in the tree above them and then went silent. "What would I have told you, Daniel?" she said finally. Her voice was not accusatory. It was genuinely asking. "You were far away. You were working hard. Every month you sent money. I knew you were trying. What was I going to say? Come home because your brother's wife has taken my room? Come home because your money is buying furniture I am not allowed to sit on?" She shook her head slowly. "I did not want to be the thing that pulled you back before you were ready. I did not want to be a burden." "You are not a burden," Daniel said. His voice came out with more force than he intended, and he softened it immediately. "Mama, you are the reason I went in the first place. Everything I did out there, every shift, every dollar I saved, it was for you. How could taking care of you ever be a burden?" Ada turned to look at him then. Her eyes were wet, but her expression was composed. The deep, weathered composure of a woman who had learned long ago how to cry without making it about herself. "You sound like your father," she said softly. Daniel looked away. He pressed his hands together on his knees and looked at the water and breathed carefully. After a moment he asked the question he had been building toward all morning, the one he needed the answer to, not for evidence but for himself, for the full picture, for every dimension of what had been done to this woman while he was away trusting the wrong person. "Tell me everything, Mama," he said. "Not the managed version. Not the version where you protect everyone's feelings. The truth. All of it." Ada looked at him for a long time. Then she looked back at the water. And slowly, carefully, in a voice so quiet he had to lean slightly toward her to hear it clearly, she began to talk. She told him about the first year after Sandra moved in, how it had started with small corrections. The way Sandra rearranged the kitchen and told Ada her system was inefficient. The way she stopped Ada from cooking certain meals because she said the smell was too strong or the method was outdated. The way she began answering for Kevin in conversations the way someone answers for a child. Casually, completely, leaving no room for the original person to respond. She told him about the money. How for the first few years Kevin had given her a regular amount from what Daniel sent. Not everything, but enough. Enough for her medications, for church offering, for small things she needed. Then Sandra had suggested they open a joint account to manage household expenses more efficiently, and Kevin had agreed, and the regular amount Ada received had begun to shrink. First a little, then more. Until 14 months ago it had become an allowance. A small, insufficient, humiliating allowance that Sandra handed to her directly in cash on the first of every month with a smile and a list of what it was and was not to be used for. Daniel's hands tightened on his knees. She told him about the room. How Sandra had come to her one morning with that bright, efficient smile, and explained that they were going to convert the master bedroom into a proper guest room because family was coming and the house needed to present well. She had said it the way you tell someone about a change in bus schedules, a practical matter already decided, requiring only acknowledgement, not discussion. Ada had looked at her and understood immediately that this was not a conversation. It was a notification. She had packed her things herself. She had moved them herself. Kevin had watched from the doorway and said nothing. Kevin watched? Daniel said. He watched, Ada said simply. Daniel stood up from the bench. He could not sit still anymore. He walked a few steps toward the water and stood there with his back to his mother and his hands in his pockets, and he looked at the light breaking across the surface, and he breathed and he breathed and he breathed. Kevin had watched. Not Sandra, he had already built a complete picture of Sandra. Sandra was sharp and calculating, and she had done what people like Sandra do when they are given unchecked access to something that does not belong to them. He had factored Sandra in. He had prepared for Sandra. But Kevin had watched his mother carry her own things to a back room and had stood in the doorway and said nothing. Kevin who had promised. Kevin who had hugged him at the gate last night with those hard back slaps like a man who had kept his word. Kevin who had sat across from him at dinner in the new furniture and talked about his business plans with the easy confidence of a man who had done nothing wrong. Daniel stood at the edge of that water for a long time. When he turned back around, Ada was watching him with an expression he recognized. The careful, cautious look she got when she was worried about him, about what was moving through him, about what he was going to do with it. "Daniel," she said quietly, "be careful." "I will, Mama. I do not want trouble," she said. "I do not want the family torn apart over me." He walked back to the bench and crouched in front of her the way he had that morning in the small room, putting himself below her eye level, making himself small in front of her the way sons do when they want their mothers to understand that they are still underneath everything, that boy who sat at her feet. He looked up at her face. "Mama," he said, "this family was not torn apart by what I am going to do. It was torn apart the day Kevin stood in that doorway and watched you carry your bags to a back room and said nothing. I am not tearing this family apart. I am just the one who showed up to see what was already broken." Ada looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached out and put her hand gently on the side of his face, her cool dry hand on his cheek, and she closed her eyes briefly like a woman saying a prayer she had been saving for exactly this moment. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay, my son." He drove her back as the sun was going down, the sky turning deep orange and red above the rooftops. Ada sat in the passenger seat with her window down again and her eyes on everything they passed, and something in her posture was different from the drive there. Something slightly unburdened, slightly lighter, like a woman who had been holding a very heavy thing alone for a very long time and had finally, carefully, passed it to someone strong enough to carry it. Daniel drove and said nothing and planned everything. Tonight he would sleep. Tomorrow morning he would act. He did not sleep well that night. Not because he was unsettled about what he was going to do. He was completely settled about that. He did not sleep well because his mind kept returning to the same image over and over like a film stuck on a single frame. Kevin standing in a doorway, watching, saying nothing. That image sat in him through the night like a splinter buried too deep to reach with your fingers. The kind that does not bleed visibly but makes everything it touches ache. He was up at 5 again. He sat on the edge of his bed in the gray early morning and he made 3 phone calls. The first was to a property agent he had found the night before while everyone was sleeping. A woman named Mrs. Frimpong who had good reviews and answered her phone on the second ring even at that hour, which Daniel took as a sign. He told her what he was looking for. A small clean house, 2 bedrooms, safe neighborhood, available immediately or close to it. She said she had 2 options she could show him that same afternoon. He said he would be there. The second call was to his cousin James, Ada's sister's son, a straight-talking, no-nonsense man of 38 who had grown up in the same neighborhood and still lived 20 minutes away and who Daniel trusted completely. He told James he needed him to come to the compound tomorrow morning. He did not explain why fully. He just said, "Come, and bring your patients, because I need a witness, not a fighter." James asked no questions. He said he would be there by 9. The third call was to his bank in Houston, confirming that the wire transfer he had set up late last night had processed. It had. He looked at the confirmation number for a moment, then put his phone face down on the bed and sat quietly in the dark. By the time Kevin and Sandra came out for breakfast, Daniel was already at the kitchen table with tea, pleasant and unhurried, asking Kevin about his electronics business, listening to Sandra talk about a function she had been invited to the following weekend. He nodded and smiled and asked follow-up questions and was, by every outward measure, a man enjoying a relaxed morning at home with his family. Inside he was completely still in the way that deep water is still. Not because nothing is moving, but because everything is moving far below the surface where it cannot be seen. That afternoon while Kevin was napping and Sandra was on the phone with someone in the bedroom, Daniel took the rental car and met Mrs. Frimpong and walked through both properties. The first was too close to a busy road, too much noise, too much exhaust, not right for Ada. The second was on a quiet street lined with old trees whose roots had pushed up through the pavements in gentle curves. The house was small and clean and full of afternoon light. It had a proper bedroom with a real bed frame, a sitting room with space for a comfortable chair by the window, a kitchen with good ventilation, a small porch at the front where you could sit in the evening and watch the street and feel like yourself. Daniel stood in the middle of the sitting room and turned slowly and looked at the light coming through the windows and thought about his mother eating leftover rice from a plastic plate under a bare bulb, and he turned back to Mrs. Frimpong and said, "I will take it." He paid the deposit that evening. From his own account. Not the joint family account, not the money he sent home, his own savings, the ones he had built quietly over 7 years of working double shifts and spending carefully and telling himself every time he wanted to buy something unnecessary. Not yet, mama first. He drove back to the compound as the evening was cooling, and he sat in the car outside the gate for a moment and looked at the house. The pale yellow paint, the new tiles, the decorative burglar bars, and he thought about everything that had been done to Ada inside it. Then he got out of the car, pushed the gate open, went inside, and told Kevin and Sandra that he would like all of them to sit together tomorrow morning after breakfast, because there were some family matters he wanted to discuss. Sandra looked up from her phone with a smile that did not quite cover the alertness that moved across her eyes. "Of course," she said smoothly. "Family conversations are always good." "Yes," Daniel said pleasantly. "They are." Kevin looked at him for a half-second longer than necessary, something uncertain moving briefly at the back of his eyes. Then he nodded. "Sure, bro. After breakfast." Daniel went to the boys' quarters and told his mother that Cousin James was coming in the morning and that he would like her present for the conversation. Ada looked at him steadily for a moment and then nodded once, slowly, with the gravity of a woman who understood exactly what kind of morning it was going to be and had decided she was ready for it. Morning came bright and sharp. James arrived at 9:10, solid and quiet, greeting everyone at the door with his usual economy of words. Sandra made tea. They all settled in the living room, Kevin and Sandra on the large gray sectional, James on the single chair by the window, Ada on the smaller chair Daniel had brought in from the dining room specifically, so she did not have to ask Sandra's permission to sit anywhere. Daniel stood. He did not sit down. He stood in the center of the room with his hands loose at his sides, and he looked at his brother. "Kevin," he said, "I want to talk about Mama." Kevin shifted. He put his tea down on the side table. He leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees in the posture of a man preparing to be reasonable. "Of course," he said. "What about her? How long has she been sleeping in the boys' quarters?" A short silence. Sandra crossed her legs and smoothed her dress over her knee. "She chose that room herself," she said, her voice calm and certain, the voice of someone who had prepared this answer and kept it ready. "Nobody moved her. She said she wanted somewhere quieter." Daniel did not look at Sandra. He kept his eyes on Kevin. "Is that what happened, Kevin?" Kevin's jaw moved. He looked briefly at Sandra and then back at Daniel. "She did say she wanted. She said the main room was, Kevin." Daniel's voice did not rise. "It did not need to. I am not asking you what she said. I am asking you what you did. Did you allow your wife to remove our mother from her own bedroom in her own house?" The room went very still. Kevin opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "It was not like that. Bro, things were complicated." "What was complicated?" Daniel said. His voice was still even and still controlled, but there was a weight in it now, a density, like something that had been compressed over a long time and was no longer pretending to be light. "She is 62 years old. She raised us by herself after Papa died. She gave everything she had to make sure we had something. And you moved her to a storage room and gave her an allowance." "An allowance, Kevin. Like she was staff. Like she was the help." "That is not fair," Sandra said sharply. Her careful smile had finally come down. Underneath it was the face she used when she felt cornered. Angular, defensive. "Ready. I have been here every day for years. Every single day. Running this house, managing everything, while you were comfortable in Houston sending money and thinking that was enough. You do not get to come back after 7 years and judge what you did not see. Daniel turned to look at Sandra for the first time since the conversation started. He looked at her steadily and quietly, and with a directness that made her sit slightly straighter despite herself. "You are right," he said. "I was not here, and I will carry that for the rest of my life. But being present does not give you the right to mistreat someone, Sandra. It just means you had more time and more opportunity to do it." Sandra's mouth tightened. She looked at Kevin. Kevin was looking at the floor. "The money," Daniel continued, turning back to his brother. 7 years, Kevin. Every month. $800, sometimes 1,000. I want to understand, where did it go? "Into the house," Kevin said quietly. "Renovations, upkeep, food, bills." "Her medication was late 3 months in a row," Daniel said. 3 months. While new furniture was arriving. While Sandra bought a car. He paused. "Let that sit in the room. Let everyone in that room feel the full weight of it. You took the money I sent to take care of our mother and you used it to take care of yourselves. And then you moved her to a back room so there was more space for everything you bought with her son's money." Kevin's head dropped. His hands were clasped between his knees and he was staring at the floor, and he looked, in that moment, not like a 30-year-old man but like a boy who had been caught in something he had always known was wrong and had simply kept moving so he would not have to stop and face it. James sat by the window and said nothing. He was there to witness, and he was witnessing. Ada sat in her chair with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on her younger son, and her expression was not angry. It was something more complicated than anger. Something that moved between grief and love and exhaustion and a terrible disappointed understanding. Sandra tried once more. "Everything we did was for this family," she said. But her voice had lost its certainty now. The edges of it had softened into something more defensive, less constructed. "We maintained this house. We kept things running. That counts for something." "Counts for something," Daniel agreed. "But it does not count for this." He gestured with one hand. Not dramatically, just a single slow gesture that seemed to take in the whole room. The new furniture, the mounted television, the smooth tiled floor. None of this cancels out what was done to her. None of this justifies a single night she spent in that room. Silence. Then Kevin looked up. His eyes were red at the rims. He looked at his mother. Really looked at her, possibly for the first time in a long time, and what crossed his face was something raw and unguarded and genuinely painful to watch. Not performance. Not strategy. Just a man seeing clearly, perhaps for the first time, exactly what he had allowed to happen to the woman who had given him everything he had. "Mama," Kevin said. His voice cracked on the word. "I'm sorry." Ada looked at her younger son for a long moment. Her eyes were wet. Her expression did not change immediately. It held everything it was holding for one long breath, and then something in it shifted very slightly, the way a door shifts when the latch releases but has not yet swung open. "I know you are," she said quietly. "But sorry alone does not warm a cold room, Kevin." The silence that followed that sentence was the loudest thing Daniel had ever heard. He stood in the center of that room and let it be loud. He did not fill it. He did not soften it. He let his brother sit in it and feel the full dimension of what he had done. He let Sandra sit in it too, and he watched her, in that silence, lose the last of her composure, the constructed warmth and the careful smile and the practiced certainty all falling away until what was left was just a woman who had overreached badly and was now sitting in the full exposure of it. Then Daniel spoke again. Quietly. Finally. "Here is what is going to happen," he said. Every eye in the room was on Daniel. Kevin had not moved from his hunched position on the sofa. Sandra had gone very still. James sat by the window with his hands folded and his face unreadable. Ada sat with her hands in her lap and her eyes on her firstborn son, and there was something in her expression now that had not been there in 14 months. The quiet, steady look of a woman who knows that someone capable is finally standing in the room. Daniel reached into the pocket of his shirt and unfolded a single piece of paper. He had printed it the night before at a business center 2 streets from the compound while Kevin and Sandra were watching television. He placed it on the coffee table, the new glass coffee table that his money had purchased, and smoothed it flat with one hand. "That is the address of Mama's new house," he said calmly. "I signed the lease yesterday. I paid the deposit yesterday. She moves in on Saturday." Sandra's head came up sharply. "Her new house," she repeated. Her new house, Daniel said. She has a house, Sandra said. The careful tone was back, stitched together quickly over the shock. She lives here. This is her home. This stopped being her home the morning you handed her an allowance and told her what she could and could not spend it on, Daniel said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. This stopped being her home the night she started eating leftover rice alone under a bare light bulb in a storage room. You do not get to call something someone's home when you have spent 14 months making them feel like a stranger in it. Sandra opened her mouth, closed it, looked at Kevin. Kevin said nothing. He was still looking at the floor. His hands were clasped so tightly between his knees that his knuckles had gone pale. Daniel picked up the paper from the table and walked to his mother and placed it in her hands. Ada looked down at the address printed on it. She read it once. Then she read it again. Her hands were very steady. Her face was composed. But a single tear moved slowly down the side of her face and she did not wipe it away immediately. She let it travel all the way down her cheek before she lifted the back of her hand and removed it quietly, privately, the way she did everything. You did not have to do this, she said softly. I know, Daniel said. I wanted to. He turned back to face the room. He looked at Kevin. As for the money, I am not going to stand here and try to calculate 7 years of wire transfers and figure out exactly what went where. That is not what today is about. But I need you to hear me clearly, Kevin. Not as your brother right now. Just as a man telling you the truth. He paused. What you allowed to happen in this house is one of the most painful things I have ever had to discover. Not because of the money. Not because of the furniture or the renovations or any of it. Because she trusted you. She trusted you completely and you looked at that trust and you chose comfort over it every single day for over a year. That is not something I can fix for you. That is something you have to carry and decide what to do with. Kevin's shoulders were shaking slightly. When he looked up, his eyes were full and his face was stripped of everything. The charm, the ease, the comfortable confidence. What was underneath it was just a man who had done a wrong thing and knew it and had no argument left against the knowing. I don't know how it got this far, Kevin said. His voice was unsteady. I kept telling myself it was temporary. That things would sort out. That Mama was okay. She was not okay, Daniel said simply. She was just quiet. Those are not the same thing. They have never been the same thing. Kevin pressed the back of his hand against his mouth. His eyes closed. Sandra sat beside him and for the first time since Daniel had known her she looked genuinely uncertain. Not strategically uncertain, not performatively uncertain, but truly unsure of herself, of what she had built and whether it had been worth building this way. Daniel looked at her. Sandra, he said, I do not have a long speech for you, but I need you to understand something. Whatever you think you built here, it was built on the suffering of a woman who never once raised her voice against you, who never called me to report you, who packed her own bags and moved herself to a back room rather than cause trouble. That kind of dignity deserves more than what you gave it. Sandra looked away. It was the first time she had looked away first in the entire conversation. James stood up from the chair by the window. He had been silent through everything and his silence had been its own kind of weight, the solid, witnessing, remembering kind. He walked to Ada and put his hand briefly on her shoulder. Then he looked at Daniel and nodded once. It was a small thing, but it meant, I saw all of this, I will not forget any of it, and I am with you. Daniel nodded back. He told Kevin directly and without anger that he would no longer be receiving any money transfers. Not because Daniel wanted to punish him, but because the arrangement had proven itself untrustworthy and Daniel was not a man who kept repeating the same mistake once he understood what it was. If Kevin wanted a relationship with his brother going forward, that relationship would have to be rebuilt from a place of honesty, and that would take time, and Daniel was willing to give it time, but he was not willing to fund another chapter of what he had just uncovered. Kevin did not argue. He just nodded. That was perhaps the most telling thing of all, that he did not argue. Because somewhere underneath everything Kevin had always known. He had just been hoping, the way people hope when they have chosen comfort over conscience, that the knowing would stay buried long enough to become normal. It had not stayed buried. Daniel had come home. 2 days later, Daniel's cousin James quietly gathered the wider family. Not a dramatic announcement, not a public shaming. Just the aunts and uncles and cousins whose opinions carried weight. The ones who had praised Kevin for holding things down in Daniel's absence. The ones who had smiled at Sandra at Christmas gatherings and called her a wonderful wife and a wonderful daughter-in-law. They came to James's house on a Sunday afternoon and Daniel told them everything. Calmly, completely, with no performance and no embellishment because the truth did not need any. The room was very quiet when he finished. One of the aunts, a heavy-set woman named Auntie Rose who had known Ada since they were girls and who had a voice like a judgment and eyes like a verdict, sat forward in her chair and looked around the room at everyone and said in a voice that was absolutely level and absolutely devastating, "And none of us saw this. None of us checked. We just believed what we were told and praised what looked good from the outside." Nobody responded to that, because there was no good response to it. It was simply true. The family knew now. And the family knowing changed the atmosphere around Kevin and Sandra in ways that no single confrontation could have achieved. The invitations slowed. The phone calls became shorter. The warm public approval that Sandra had worked so hard to cultivate quietly withdrew itself the way approval always does when the thing it was based on turns out to have been a performance. Saturday came soft and clear. Daniel hired a small truck and 2 young men to help with the moving. There was not much to move. Ada owned less than she should have at 62 because most of what she had owned had been quietly absorbed into the main house over the years. But what she had, they packed carefully. Her Bible, her good clothes, the photographs she had kept in a small box under the bed in the boys' quarters. Photographs of Daniel as a boy, of Kevin before everything, of her husband in his borrowed suit on their wedding day, laughing at something off camera. Her small television. Her cooking pots, which Sandra had moved to the back of the kitchen cabinet years ago in favor of newer ones but which Ada had kept because her hands knew them. Daniel carried the boxes himself. He did not let the hired men carry his mother's things. He did it himself, every box, every bag, back and forth from the small room to the truck, because it felt important to do it with his own hands. Ada stood in the compound and watched him work and said nothing. Her face was composed and quiet and full of something that did not have a simple name, something that was grief and relief and love and loss all pressed together into the expression of a woman closing one chapter of her life with both hands and preparing to turn the page. When everything was loaded, Daniel came and stood beside her. They both looked at the house one last time. The pale yellow paint, the new tiles, the decorative burglar bars catching the morning light. "Are you ready?" Daniel said. Ada straightened up. She squared her shoulders the way she had always done. That small private gesture of a woman gathering herself, settling herself into her own spine, deciding to be all right. Then she looked at her son. "I have been ready," she said, "since the day you called and said you were coming home." He put his arm around her shoulders and walked her to the car. The new house was everything he had wanted it to be for her. Full of morning light, quiet street, the old trees outside whose roots pushed gently through the pavement. He had arranged the sitting room furniture himself the night before, her chair by the window exactly where a chair should be, the small table beside it with space for her Bible and her glasses and her cup of tea. He had put fresh flowers on the kitchen table. He had made the bed himself with new sheets, the soft kind, the kind that had some weight to them and felt like being held. He had framed a photograph, the 2 of them from years ago, Daniel maybe 12 years old, Ada laughing at something he had said, her whole face open and unguarded and completely herself, and hung it on the wall of her sitting room where she would see it every time she came through the door. When Ada walked in, she moved through the room slowly, touching things lightly as she went, the walls, the window frame, the back of her chair. She stopped in the kitchen and opened the fridge the way she had always opened fridges, both hands on the door, looking carefully at everything inside. She closed it. She stood very still for a moment. Then she walked to the sitting room and saw the photograph on the wall. She stood in front of it for a long time without speaking. Her hand came up slowly and her fingers touched the edge of the frame very gently, the way you touch something you cannot quite believe is real. Then she sat down in her chair by the window. She looked out at the quiet street and the old trees and the morning light coming down through the leaves in long soft pieces, and she folded her hands in her lap and she closed her eyes. Her lips were moving. She was praying. Daniel stood in the doorway and watched his mother pray in her own home, in her own chair, in a room full of light, and he felt something in him that had been clenched tight for days, for weeks, perhaps for years, finally and completely release. He did not interrupt her. He leaned against the doorframe and crossed his arms and watched over her the way she had watched over him his entire life, and he let her finish every word. There is a version of the story happening right now in a house somewhere in this world. A mother in a back room. A son far away, working hard, trusting the wrong person, believing everything is fine because nobody has told him otherwise. A silence that has gone on so long it has started to feel like normal. If you are that son or that daughter, call home today. Not a quick check-in. A real call. Ask the questions you have been too busy to ask. And if something feels wrong, trust that feeling. Go and see. Visit unannounced. Talk to the neighbors. Look at where your mother is sleeping. Look at her hands. Look at her face when she first sees you and watch what lives in her expression before she has time to arrange it into something that won't worry you. And if you are that mother right now, sitting somewhere quiet, managing, holding on, telling yourself things will sort out and help is coming, I want you to hear this clearly. Your suffering is not invisible to God even when it is invisible to everyone else. He sees the small room. He sees the plastic plate. He sees every night you spent waiting. And he is the one who puts it in a son's heart to book a flight home at exactly the right time. Daniel did not arrive too late. And neither will yours. If the story moved you, share it right now with someone who needs to hear it. A friend, a sibling, someone who has a parent depending on someone else from a distance. Share it. It might be the most important thing you do today. Drop an amen in the comments if you believe that God exposes hidden things at exactly the right time. And subscribe to this channel because every single week we bring you stories that remind you what truly matters. Family, loyalty, and the kind of love that comes home no matter how far it has had to travel. Daniel Osei came home after 7 years. And he came home just in time.